So we are back talking about CT dose reduction. We are now on part 2, reduce. We did review. We're going to talk about reformat in a bit, but right now we're talking about reducing your radiation dose. So the first option is just zero radiation. And you're not going to do that with a CT scan. You're going to do that with other things like just basic clinical care. You admit the patient, observe them, see how they're doing. You don't always need imaging. Trouble with just relying on clinical acumen, history and physical, you're going to miss some stuff. And people are afraid of getting sued. They may want to get the imaging test to be sure that they're not missing anything. And that's understandable. What about ultrasound? Well, for kids, it's first line for a lot of things. Kids, they're smaller. The ultrasound just gives you exquisite information. There's no radiation dose. And it is first line for these diagnoses listed here. Now, the trouble is, ultrasound isn't perfect. No test is. Not everyone has 24/7 ultrasound. It requires an experienced sonographer. It requires a radiologist who's familiar with reading ultrasound. It's not great for air and bone structures. And it only looks at one thing. You have to ask a question and look for that. It's not necessarily a great survey to just find things that are unexpected. Not to say that that's a good approach, but it is much more targeted than a CT scan, which gives you everything that's in there. What about MRI? MRI also is first line for a variety of indications, particularly CNS and some bone indications. But also, not everyone has 24/7 MRI. It's much more expensive than CT. It takes a lot longer. It might require anesthesia. They might have incompatible implantable devices. Not everyone's comfortable looking at MRI if they don't do it every day. So it's a more advanced test. It's more expensive. It's not perfect either. So really what this talk is about is lowering your radiation dose. So how do we do that? It's really easy. Like I said, knowing your dose is the first step. Dialing it down is the easy part. So here we talked about a multi-phase CT study, but really you should, whenever possible, just do a single-phase CT, especially in kids. It's rare, maybe a few times per year, that I will do a multi-phase CT in a kid. And it's usually someone who has a complex transplant where we definitely need exquisite arterial and venous information. The trouble is there's a lot of protocols out there for liver tumors, pancreas tumors, renal tumors, with the associated liver, pancreas, and renal CT protocols that really don't help in kids. They should be getting an MRI. So it's rare that you would ever need to use multi-phase CT in a kid. And the less you scan, you've just dropped your dose by exactly that much. This one takes a little bit of effort. Do we really need, for that neck mass, to see the skull base? Do we really need to see all of that aortic arch and upper chest? Probably not. So if you're evaluating a mass, place the BB marker at the mass, scan above it and below it. Again, the less that you scan, the less dose that you'll impart. Now, this is perhaps the slide that will freak people out. They're thinking of the physics and they're nervous about altering the parameters incorrectly, but it's pretty easy. You lower your KVP and your MA, and or you increase your slice thickness, your pitch for a spiral CT, or your rotation speed if you have an axial CT. And you work with your technologist to dial things down, and you can do it incrementally if you're nervous. You don't want to go too slow, otherwise you'll spend years slowly lowering your dose. But work with your technologist, and this is very doable. And there's a lot of templates out there. These are the dosing parameters that we use for our kids at UCSF. Now, it's kind of curious. Notice how the MA spikes up in infants. And we just found empirically that when we use 80 kVp in the lowest weight category, that we needed to give the machine a little bit more leeway in MA. Otherwise, we were suffering in terms of image quality. And we just found that empirically. So it doesn't necessarily make sense that the yellow would suddenly spike up in an infant, but that's just what we found. And there's other weight-based dosing algorithms out there that you could use. That way you don't have to figure it out for yourself. Just steal from someone else's experience. There's also the idea of indication-based dosing, that you have different CTs for different indications. So for example, You don't really need high dose if you're looking at the airway or renal stones or fractures, but you probably need your regular dose. Don't call it high dose because that will freak everyone out. You call it standard dose for infection, inflammation, tumor. And so you have two different subsets. And some places are doing this. It requires more work. So now you have two separate protocols. You also have to think about it. Each time you get a CT request, you can't just automate the protocoling. You have to stop and have someone say, what indication is this? Now there's a computer feature, automatic exposure control, which looks at the scout and says, how much dose do I need to impart in order to achieve satisfactory levels of image noise? So for example, going through the shoulders, the scanner is going to have to increase the dose. Going through the mid-chest, mostly lungs, you can lower the dose. But then once you hit the upper abdomen, you have to increase the dose again. Now, be aware that this is based on the scout. The scanner does not think about it on the fly. So if your arms are up for the scout but down for your actual CT, the machine won't know that, and those humeri might get in the way, and the machine wasn't prepared to have the dose necessary to make that image look better. Similarly, if you put a breast shield on during the scout, the machine's just going to say, hey, look at those nice breast shields. We're just going to increase the dose, and that's not going to be a good thing. So if you want to use breast shields, you'll trick the computer by no shield when you scout, but then last minute put them on before you actually scan the patient. There's another idea called image quality selection, where basically you say, I don't want to deal with all the numbers. I want the computer to think about it. And you simplify it into one simple kind of number or an image quality level. Different manufacturers have different names and ways of achieving this, but it's a way to simplify the process so that you can say, look, I don't care how you do it. I just want you to have at least this quality of a scan and let the computer do the thinking. That was the end of part 2, where we talked about reducing your radiation dose. In a bit, we are going to move on to part 3, which is about using what are called reformats to make what you've already done up until this point look even better.